Hello, everyone. Good afternoon if you are in France or in Europe. Good morning if you are on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean in the United States, for instance. And good evening if you are in Japan or in Asia at large, and perhaps in Australia, like some people here in the room. Today, we're having this webinar on a topic which has been growing in its importance over the past few months in particular, and which also is reflected in the current news, if you remember the Putin-Kim Jong-un meeting, for instance, and the potential impact it might have for the security in the region. The title of this webinar is The US, Europe, and France Perspectives on the New National Security Strategy of Japan. It is actually last December, in December 2022, that Japan has released 3 new strategic documents that we will be discussing today: the National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, but also the Defense Buildup Program. And one might see inside these documents some sort of historic turning point for Japan's defense policy, especially when it comes to the raise of the GDP and the defense budget from 1% to 2% of the GDP, my mistake, and also the acquisition of counter-attack capabilities and greater operational integration with the US armed forces. As I've said earlier, it is also something that we have to understand as it faces the current environment, especially China, North Korea, and Russia, which are identified as a dangerous neighborhood for Japan, and also some fears as regards the future development in the Taiwan Strait. So we have today 3 distinguished speakers who will be looking at the Japanese political debate that has accompanied this development and these decisions taken by the current cabinet, and how is Tokyo facing these geopolitical issues and this changing environment. And also we will discuss how European states, France in particular, but also the United States, have some sort of perception of this changing and how they position themselves in the face of this strengthening of strategic relations, especially between Tokyo and Washington, D.C. So let me introduce very briefly our speakers today. From Washington, D.C., we are very pleased to host Dr. Aoki Naoko. Dr. Aoki, you are an associate political scientist with the RAND Corporation in the United States, in Washington, D.C. You work on East Asian security issues, and you have written about Japanese foreign policy and security issues, the North Korean let's say, problem, or the North Korean nuclear issue in particular, but also the alliances with the United States in Asia and the nuclear dynamics in the region. In your presentation, you will be the first speaker, will be focusing on Japan's threat environment and the country's approaches for dealing with that threat or that perception of the threat. Second, from Canberra in Australia, thank you very much for being with us so late. Dr. Tsuruoka Michito, you are currently Associate Professor at Keio University in Japan, but at the moment, visiting fellow at the Strategic and Defense Studies Center within the Australian National University in Canberra, Australia. You are working on international security, European politics, and Japan's foreign and security policy. Your presentation will be addressing politics on security and defense in Japan and Tokyo's expanding strategic ties with other like-minded countries. Our last speaker will be Marianne Peron-Doise. Marianne is from Paris. She's in Paris currently. Marianne, you are Associate Research Fellow with IRIS. And actually at IRIS, you are also the director of the Indo-Pacific Geopolitical Observatory. I remind our audience today that this observatory is actually organizing today's seminar. You also teach maritime security at Sciences Po Paris and the Catholic University in Lille. And you recently co-edited a special report on the Indo-Pacific published last June in the magazine Herodot, but also in Iris Quarterly a few weeks earlier. Your presentation will be focusing on the reactions of the EU and France in particular to Japan's national security strategy recent publications. And the title of your presentation will be, Where does the exceptional France-Japan partnership stand after the publication of the Tokyo National Security Strategy? I think it's now time to leave the floor to our speakers. I will kindly ask you to respect the timing of about 15 minutes for each. And just for our audience, I remind you that you can use the little Q&A button to address your questions. And I will be collecting all the questions during these presentations. And later we will have, I believe, 30 to 40 minutes to address the answers. So Dr. Aoki, the floor is yours. Thank you very much again for joining us. And I will give you 15 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation to be on this panel on an important topic. What I would like to do is, so my presentation is more like an overview framing conversation, unpacking a little bit what Japan's threat environment is like and what it's doing to try to deal with those threats. So in terms of the threat environment, so Japan's primary concern is China. China's rapid military modernization, its speedier than expected nuclear modernization. Those are some of the concerns that Japan has. And of course, China's assertiveness in the region is a major concern as well. The second country that Japan is concerned about is North Korea. North Korea is continuing its improvement of nuclear missile arsenals, and that is, of course, a threat to Japan. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which was seen as an attempt by a revisionist power to change the status quo using military unilateral force, was also seen as a great threat to the international order. And quite frankly, it wasn't just the political elite that's reacting to this. So the Japanese public was also very concerned about what this could mean. And of course, the associations are made with a possible Taiwan contingency, for example. So that's, and I should also mention that cooperation between and among these countries, so China, Russia, and North Korea, are of great concern for Japan as well. China and Russia have flown bombers together in the areas near Japan, and also conducted naval drills near Japan as well. As it was mentioned earlier, Russia and North Korea are also cooperating, strengthening cooperation. And of course, if this means Russia gets more arms for its war in Ukraine, and if this means that Russia helps North Korea more technologically, that is a concern for Japan as well. So that is the kind of the threat environment that Japan is in. And I would also note that, I should also note that the war in Ukraine, the invasion that started, Russia's invasion that started in 2022, if you look at the Japanese response from the 2014 incident, it's very different. Japan acted very strongly, very quickly, and very strongly against Russia. And there are a couple of reasons for this, one of which is that Japan in 2014, it was trying to solve a territorial dispute with with Russia. And also it was a strategic choice of not trying to maintain a good relationship with Russia because it had enough to worry about with China and North Korea. Now that has changed. So this is the threat environment. This is part of the threat environment that Japan faces today. So what is Japan doing about this? There are three approaches that Japan is taking. One is bolstering its own defense. So, and the three key documents were mentioned a little bit earlier. These were issued in late December 2022. It is the National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, and the Defense Buildup Plan. And they represent a hierarchy of objectives. So the National Security Strategy provides the country's foreign and security policy direction over the next 10 years. The National Defense Strategy focuses on defense policies and capabilities for 10 years. And the Defense Buildup Plan sets the level of defense capability that Japan needs and defense equipment to achieve those goals. So, and this is also a 10-year program. This is new. The previous one, its predecessor was actually 5 years. So this is a 10-year program that basically looks out to the future 10 years and thinks about, what Japan needs. It is also divided into two blocks. So the first 5 years is more about readiness and resiliency, and the next 5 years about modernizing Japan's forces and defense forces and exploiting advanced technologies to defeat aggression earlier and at a further distance. So those are the three strategic documents. And one of the features, of course, is the significant increase in the defense budget that was mentioned earlier. Japan's defense budget had traditionally been capped at 1% of GDP. This is not a legal requirement. It's a political goal that was meant to signal that Japan was not going to reemerge as a militarist nation again. But of course, the threat environment has changed. Oh, by the way, this has been breached technically a couple of times. Not too much, but a little bit. But the defense spending has always been at the 1% level, nevertheless. The goal, of course, is to increase this to the defense-related budget to 2% of GDP. So this is going to include not just the pure defense budget, but budget for the Coast Guard, for example, and some infrastructure projects, for example, but they're all defense related. So that's the increase in the defense budget. And according to the Defense Buildup Plan, so this is the 10-year program that I just talked about earlier, the first 5 years of expenditure is expected to reach 43 trillion yen, or about 290 billion US dollars. And the fiscal year 2023 budget, which was the first year of this 5-year program, was at 6.8 trillion yen, or about 46 billion US dollars. One other notable point is the acquisition of the Japanese government decided that it was going to acquire the self-defense forces are going to acquire the counter-strike capabilities, which is the ability to target military facilities deep in adversaries' territory, if necessary, of course. And this is meant to reinforce deterrence by raising the cost of aggression against Japan. So basically making the adversaries' calculations, complicating the adversaries' calculations about trying to attack Japan. The second, so that was the first pillar, bolstering its own defense. The second one is strengthening its alliances with the United States. And there have been some adjustments made earlier this year, including U.S. troop presence on Okinawa to enhance anti-ship capabilities to deal with threats in the South and East China Seas. The third pillar, of course, is cooperating with like-minded countries, and I believe Dr. Tsuruoka is going to cover this in great detail, so I'm just going to say here that Japan is trying to create layers of defense, create layers of defense, and so that includes bilateral as well as multilateral, and I would note also in terms of the North Korea threat, the trilateral cooperation involving Japan, South Korea, and the United States. what I would also like to know a little bit about what Japan is. I just talked about what Japan is doing. What Japan is unlikely to do, unprepared to do at this point, it seems, is one, change the constitution. The Article 9 of the Constitution, of course, renounces war as a means of excuse me, settling international disputes. I don't think there's any momentum to change that at the moment. And also, although Japan is facing a lot of nuclear threats, there is no momentum for developing indigenous nuclear weapons, for example. There was some talk earlier in 2022 at the start of around the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine about the possibility of nuclear sharing, for example, and that was debated for a little bit, but I don't think there's any momentum for that either. So I think Japan is at this point in the nuclear space trying to basically strengthen U.S. extended nuclear deterrence. So that's the path that Japan is taking right now. That's what I have for my prepared comments, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aoki. I think that's a very good overall presentation of all the different challenges, but also the decisions taken by the current cabinet. So I can see that we already have some questions, and we will, of course, come back to that later. Now I will leave the floor to Professor Tsuruoka Michito, and I remind that the title of your presentation will be focusing on the politics on security and defense in Japan and Tokyo's expanding strategic ties with other like-minded countries. So the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. I very much look forward to this conversation. Thinking about Japan's defense and the evolution of Japan's defense policy. So what we are seeing is a sort of a Japan Zeitenwende. So it's a turning point in history. So this is exactly something that Prime Minister Kishida mentioned more than a couple of times. The important background of this is that Japanese public, including ordinary people, are becoming more supportive of Japan's expanding defense posture. So I think over the past 1.5 years or 2 years, there are three factors that have made people being more aware of security environment surrounding Japan and security challenges that Japan is facing. And the first of which is the war in Ukraine. So that was a huge shock to many Japanese. And the level of interest in the war in Ukraine has been consistently quite high. So still that's almost every day in TV programs in Japan, we talk about very detailed analysis on the battlefield, on the ground things. This is actually the very important occasion for the first time since the end of the Second World War, I mean, that people now need to think about what it takes to defend the country. So this is a question that many people didn't even think of for many decades. So, but now suddenly that the ordinary people included are thinking about these security and defense core issues of the country. And second, so rising tensions over Taiwan is also a quite fashionable and popular topic, not only among politicians, but also among ordinary people as well. So that is the second factor. And the third factor has to do with North Korea. So North Korea has been launching ballistic missiles, and sometimes those missiles fly over Japan. So that's the imminent threat for Japanese. So because of these three combinations, as a result of this, the combination of the three factors, and of course there are other factors as well, but broadly, so these are the three main factors, I believe, that because of these factors, that now more and more people support the idea of strengthening Japan's defense posture, including the idea of spending more money on defense. So there is now a higher support for a bigger defense budget, but still the controversies continue, and particularly interestingly among ruling party politicians, Liberal Democratic Party politicians, they are still very much debating where to find money. So one of the ideas is to raise tax to fund bigger defense budget, but this is no surprise that not quite popular, and particularly for politicians who are facing elections, it's never been a popular idea. So the another very unpopular idea is to slash other budget items. So the increasing welfare budget, it's something that we are thinking of as a sort of target of cutting, but of course, as you can imagine, that there are huge resistances to that sort of idea. So then the least unpopular idea would be to issue more government bond, so borrow money from people. So that's quite an appealing idea, particularly for politicians. But there are debates whether this is really a great idea or a responsible way of thinking about defense issues. So this remains a quite controversial. So despite the fact that we have agreed to the sort of overall 5-year defense budget maximum sort of amount of money for defense, but the problem of securing money is still unresolved, remains unresolved. And looking at the national security strategy and national defense strategy, it is quite interesting that the Japanese defense debates and Japanese defense discourse is becoming more honest. I'm not saying that previously we are dishonest. I don't really think so, but still, there were some issues that we, and the government particularly, didn't want to talk about. But now, so because of a deteriorating security environment surrounding the country, that now we need to talk about real issues now, and one of which is about China. So when Japan decided to build missile defense capability, for example, at the end of the 20th century, we didn't talk about China because North Korea was an obvious target for Japan's missile defense, and not just for the missile defense, but also other capabilities as well. So North Korea has been used as a sort of a convenient excuse why we need more defense equipment and why we need a bigger defense budget. But the latest national defense strategy and national security strategy describes China as posing an unprecedented and the greatest strategic challenge for Japan. So this terminology is quite something. Still, of course, there are some people who say that we should call China a threat. But I think the unprecedented and greatest strategic challenge, I think, is a quite robust language. But now that we are more prepared to talk about China upfront in our national security and national defense documents. So this is a sort of a new phenomenon and a new development. And another sort of a revelation out of these three strategic documents is that the government now acknowledges that ballistic missile defense is not enough. So they're looking at the improvement and expansion of North Korea's ballistic missiles. So Japan's missile defense, despite the fact that it's state-of-the-art and highly capable, but still they're looking at the increasing sophistication and the increasing number of missiles that North Korea has. It's becoming more questionable to what extent we are really fully prepared and fully capable of intercepting all the incoming missiles. And also, the vis-a-vis China, the missile defense capability, of course, is not enough. It's just so obvious. And that is exactly why the government has decided to acquire counter-strike capability, because the deterrence by denial, by missile defense, is not enough. Then what it means is that we need other means to defend the country and enhance deterrence. So the idea of acquiring counter-strike capability is very much in this context. Some words on strengthening the strategic ties with other like-minded countries. Of course, the strengthening the alliance with the United States is always, has been and is, and will remain the very basic and fundamental thing for Japan's security and defense. And this is not going to change. But at the same time, somewhat in light of the fact that the US power is declining, at least in relative terms, in the region, because the military balance, for example, between China on the one hand, and US, Japan, and other US allies and partners on the other, has been shifting in favor of China. So this is just a reality. So that means that we need more efforts. So Japan needs to acquire more capabilities. That's one thing. But at the same time, they're working more closely with other like-minded countries sharing values and strategic interests. The need for that is increasing. And this is mainly about European countries and Australia. I just happen to be in Australia. So the Japan-Australia security and defense ties is flourishing, actually. So a few weeks ago, for the first time that Japan sent F-35 Stress fighters, the fifth generation of fighters, to Australia. And after that, Australian F-35 were deployed to Japan for joint training. So and also Japan is participating in various international joint training and exercises in Australia. So Talisman Sabre and Pitch Black and other exercises. So this is really a developing. And also the defense equipment cooperation is part of this picture. And in this context, the Japan, UK, Italy joint project to develop the next generation of fighters, jet fighters, so which is called GCAP, the Global Combat Air Program. So the Japan, UK, Italy and project is getting started. So the jointly developing fighter jets is quite something, because it cannot be a short-term cooperation, because it's going to take a long time, and of course, if you think about the life cycle of such aircraft, and so this relationship is supposed to continue for at least a generation, or perhaps more than that. So 30, 40, 50 years project. So this is going to be something that still the realization in Japan about how strategic it is going to be is still somewhat lacking. So that we are slowly realizing that this is going to be quite something. So because Japan is very much a newcomer to international the joint research and development and production of the defense equipment. So we are learning by working with the UK and Italy for the fighter jet project, and also the Japan very much welcomes increasing European engagement, including by sending ships and aircraft, and in this case, very much France is very much a big player. So they're sending ships and also they're sending aircraft. So this is going to be now. This is now a quite a familiar seen that the French vessels are sailing in the South China Sea or East China Sea and flying over not just the South Pacific, but also in Northeast Asia as well. So this is quite an encouraging development, particularly in light of the fact that the European countries are really busy in addressing threats from Russia and also supporting Ukraine, but still, it's quite remarkable that the major European countries, particularly France and the UK, are and remain committed to their engagement, military engagement in the Indo-Pacific region. So that's quite something. And finally, just a few words on challenges, remaining homework for Japan in terms of in terms of advancing the agenda of improving defense capability and defense posture. The first challenge is recruitment. So the self-defense forces need to attract young people. So the increasing budget is a very easy part. And also the building more vessels and buying more aircraft, that's quite easy. So as long as you have money, you can do that. But when it comes to recruiting people, it's really a substantial challenge, and particularly in the context of a decreasing population in Japan. So it's getting more and more difficult to attract young people. So but without people, we cannot do anything. So that's really a serious structural problem to which we have yet to find a clear the solution. So that is really a serious issue. And second challenge is the problem in information security. So Japan is not quite good at the securing information. So there have been series of incidents like the Chinese penetration into Japanese MOD system. And Japan's reputation in this regard is not quite high. And that has already hindered some important cooperation, even with the United States. So this is a huge issue, and this is very much damaging Japan's national interest. So this is a huge challenge and homework that Tokyo needs to address in the coming months and years. And thirdly, finally, yes, Dr. Aoki talked about the idea of acquiring nuclear weapons, and I very much agree that there is almost zero possibility for Japan to even think of developing indigenous nuclear weapons. But the problem here is that much lower the level than that. It is about accepting the port visits of nuclear-powered vessels. So the nuclear-powered vessels and nuclear weapons are two totally different things. But in Japanese public debates, sometimes these are very much in the same context, put in the same context. And it is really controversial. So when the UK sent a aircraft strike, the carrier strike group back in I think it was 2021, there was a nuclear-powered submarine, attack submarine, SSN, was accompanying the aircraft carrier, but that submarine didn't come to Japan. So it had to go to South Korea, Busan, the naval base actually. So it's really controversial, and only the US has been able to make port calls of nuclear-powered submarines. So the Virginia-class attack submarines from time to time come to Yokosuka, for example, but the administrative procedures for doing that in the context of a nuclear safety is really daunting. So only the United States has been able to do that. So the next challenge, of course, is very much about French aircraft carrier, Charles de Gaulle, is supposed to be coming to Asia, as far as I understand, in 2025, I guess. And it's highly likely for the aircraft carrier to be accompanied by a SSN, so a nuclear-powered attack submarine. So whether Japan is going to be able to accept and welcome the port visit of a nuclear-powered submarine is a huge challenge. But on one hand, we say that we want to develop this strategic ties with France, but at the same time, if we say no to the port call of the SSN, then that's going to be a disaster, and it's going to give you a very confusing message from Tokyo. So I'm very much concerned about that, and but this is really a political issue and one of the most difficult homeworks that Japan has. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tsuruoka. I believe that Marianne will be able to answer or partly answer your last question on the Charles de Gaulle visit to Japan and the SSN accompanying it. I believe it's actually it's a secret. Okay, well you take the responsibility for it.
And actually, the aircraft carrier itself is nuclear powered, so that's the biggest problem.
Yeah,
and then
indeed.
submarine
Yes,
question
indeed.
is also there.
And that's the only one we have, so there's no choice. We cannot send another one. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. There are many points that you have raised that are particularly interesting for all of us here, including the perception of among the public opinion in Japan of these changes. And I believe that it also echoes Dr. Aoki's comments earlier. And I believe that there will be many questions about, what's the future of Japan's posture when it comes to potential changes of these perceptions. You have also addressed the let's say the rising China factor, or the fact that China is now more and more quoted as a potential threat or risk or challenge or whatever it is, but it is an issue at the end of the day for Japan, and it justifies the adjustments that we have been observing in the past few years and in this year in particular. And your last point is also, I believe, a perfect transition to Marianne Peron-Doise's presentation when it comes to the relations with the so-called like-minded countries. So yes, you have mentioned Australia, and it's very interesting. Perhaps we could also mention some other partners in Asia, the case of Korea. Who knows what's the future of Korea-Japan strategic relation? I mean, there are many talks taking place at the moment. And of course, the fact that with France, there was this dialogue, the so-called 2+2 dialogue. And I believe that Marianne will address the challenges and also the opportunities for the future of France-Japan relation as regard the recent strategic developments in Japan. Marianne, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Barthelemy. Yes, I'm going to focus my remark on the French reaction to EU and French reaction to publication of the Japan new strategic new security strategy. And if you allow me, I will be a little provocative, because I would like also to speak about NATO, China, of course, and to put my presentation under some quoted made by President Macron, which regularly seems to launch a kind of polemic regarding French approach, French Indo-Pacific strategy, relation with the US, and the lack of clarity maybe regarding French-China policy. So as Barthelemy reminded, France has been and is a very strong partner for Japan and for many, many years. And France has always encouraged Tokyo to commit to strengthen its defense capability and to strengthen its armed forces. The two countries have shared analysis on the trade surrounding Japan, development of North Korea nuclear and ballistic trade, Chinese military expansion. And of course, France has been and is still a strong supporter of Japan involvement in the management of international security, peacekeeping operation in Africa, fight against piracy in the Indian Ocean. And to finish with that, two countries have, as you may know, adopted an Indo-Pacific roadmap and strategy for the Indo-Pacific. And they are very much willing to develop their cooperation in maritime security, in climate, in environment, biodiversity, and quality infrastructure, which are very, I would say, important topics for the littoral state of the region. And it is because of this proximity and this shared analysis that France's relation with Japan has been elevated to the status of excellence since 2013. And this is why I titled my presentation, Where is Exceptional Partnership between France and Japan after the publication of Tokyo NSS. And in fact, if I wanted to sum up very roughly, I will say the most immediate consequence I can see of this NSS over France and Japan relationship. I will raise a question about Japanese integration and its political and military, we say, closeness with United States, and the fact that there are greater operational integration that are coming, that are reflecting in this new SSS, not only with America, but also with South Korea. And it seems to me that there is a dynamic with US to try to reinforce a network of very close allies through all around the Indo-Pacific. I have in mind not only Japan, but you mentioned Australia, and I will add UK, not to forget India. And having in mind this big picture, maybe France could feel a little marginalized, a little limited. And this came from also the development of new security format, also developed by the United States with close allies. I have in mind the Quad, and of course, not to mention AUKUS. So I will just remind that the current year has been a very busy one on the diplomatic and strategic front from Japan and Prime Minister Kishida, not least because of the preparation of the G7 summit in May. But you may remember that in January, Fumio Kishida made a very long visit in France, in Europe, Italy, Great Britain, in United States and Canada. He also held a very historic summit with its South Korean counterpart, which was followed by a trilateral meeting, a quite groundbreaking trilateral meeting between the United States, South Korea, and Japan in July. It was in July. And the three allies decided at this moment to step up coordination and cooperation in order to counter China's military ambition and also the growing trade represented by North Korea. Fumio Kishida made also a very high-profile visit to Kiev in March, where he met President Zelensky. And finally, I would like to mention something important in my view, which was the Japanese Prime Minister presence at the NATO summit in Vilnius in July this year, alongside with three other Indo-Pacific allies of the United States, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. And this was the second time where this country attended the NATO summit following the Madrid summit in June. It was in 2022. Summit which was dominated by impact of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And this trip and this high-level meeting were, of course, mainly dominated by security issues, the war in Ukraine, but also Taiwan. And they were followed by Japanese announcement concerning a significant change in Tokyo global strategic posture and the Japan-US alliance. That is to say, the announcement of this new security strategy with acquisition of counterattack capability, that is to say, ability to strike enemy-based with long-range missiles. And this was the most widely commented announcement of Japan. And the United States has agreed to deliver tomahawk cruise missiles. And it seems to me that Tokyo was quite privileged in this, because the only other country that has this delivery of cruise missiles was only the United Kingdom. And we can understand that Washington is seeking to increase interoperability with the Japanese self-defense forces in order to strengthen the alliance deterrent capability in a very tense Indo-Pacific. And it is clear from Japan diplomatic activity in these recent months and from Prime Minister Kishida's statement that this is not just about security in the Indo-Pacific, but that a link has been established between the security in Europe and the security in the Indo-Pacific. And this strategic porosity is, of course, a result of the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, which in the mind of Japan leader could encourage other form of bellicosity in its immediate surrounding. And this is very clear in the Japan National Security Strategy. I can quote page 13, where it states, Russia aggression against Ukraine has easily breached the very foundation of the rules that shape the international order. The possibility cannot be precluded that a similar serious situation may arise in the future in the Indo-Pacific region, especially in East Asia. And however, since the NATO Madrid summit, the attention given to the war in Ukraine has not prevented NATO wanted to take into account threats that are very far from its traditional sphere of action, of which Asia is not a part. The fact is the adoption of the NATO new strategic concept now includes China in NATO concept. And the beginning of what may appear to be a strategy of global containment of China by United States and its main ASEAN allies, including Japan, South Korea, and Australia, have raised quite a lot of questions in Europe, and particularly in France. And one of the most obvious and telling reaction to this potential involvement of NATO in the Indo-Pacific security was President Macron's public reaction to the announcement of opening of a NATO liaison office in Tokyo. And you may remember, Michito, that the French president declared that this decision could be, I quote, a big mistake. So despite calls for NATO to work more closely with partners in North Asia, France is apparently reluctant to support anything that should tension between the alliance and China. And as many French academics can also explain, I quote, there is no NATO liaison office in any country in the region. If NATO needs situational awareness in the region, it can use the embassy designated as point of contact. And it was a sentence that I extract from an article from the Financial Times. And generally speaking, opening of a NATO office in Japan would require the unanimous approval of the North Atlantic Council, where France could use its veto to show its opposition. So NATO, originally designated as a transatlantic security organization against the Soviet Communist bloc, is attempting to define its role in the face of a rising China, while also supporting Ukraine against Russian invasion. And the NATO General Secretary Stoltenberg pointed out what happens in Asia matters for Europe, and what's happened in Europe matters for Asia. And therefore, it is even more important that NATO allies are strengthening our partnership with our Indo-Pacific partner. And to narrow the perspective of my presentation, I would say that what is at stake in the Japan National Security Strategy here is the China factor and how China has been perceived as, and it is a major security issue, not only for Japan, of course, but also for EU, for France, for NATO, and by popularity for Japan relation with France, with the EU and NATO. And significantly, in my view, what is at stake here is a policy vis-à-vis China in a time of very growing tension and strategic competition between United States and China. And we all know United States is a major security ally, not only for Japan in the Indo-Pacific, but also for France in Europe and in the Indo-Pacific. And this global problematic is echoing very much other declaration made by President Macron, who also provoked quite a polemic in late April after he gave an interview on a flight back from China, where he was for an official visit, and when he declared that Europeans should not be just, I quote, American followers and get caught up in crises that are not ours. So later, the French government clarifies that President Macron did not mean to support Beijing view on Taiwan, of course, but called instead for an EU view that is distinct from the American one. And this goes along with the French objective and ambition to build an Indo-Pacific strategy away from great power competition that could be supported by local partners as Japan, as India, as ASEAN country, island state in the South Pacific, and just to prevent or willing to prevent bipolarization of the region and a bloc policy in the Indo-Pacific. And during his recent visit in the South Pacific and Sri Lanka in July, President Macron once again emphasized the particularity of France's approach to the Indo-Pacific, often described by the expression of balancing power, meaning in French, puissance d'équilibre, and on several occasions referring to the French strategy as the third way. So for France, the NATO office in Tokyo would align with many other multilateral initiatives led by Washington as the Quad, this dialogue format between Washington, Australia, India, and Japan, but also AUKUS, this new minilateral format for strengthening cooperation, not only on submarine program, but in advanced technology between Washington, Australia, and UK. Initiative, you know, that France does not share, and moreover, from which it was brutally excluded is, if we consider AUKUS, which resulted in the cancellation of the contract for the supply of submarine by French naval group, but also called into question the Australian pillar of the Indo-Pacific strategy of France in the South Pacific. And it seemed to France that the Japan new security strategy is in line with this trend by integrating its self-defense forces more closely in operational and technological terms with the United States global military posture in the Indo-Pacific and its integrated deterrence network. And on closer examination, I will say that maintaining a calibrated balance between the United States and China, as France wish to do, is also an important issue for Japan, an important issue for South Korea, for India, and many Southeast Asian countries, such as Singapore and Indonesia. We all know that these countries have very strong strategic relations with the United States, but also significant economic exchange with China, which for many of them is a very close neighbor. And to conclude and sum up my thought, Barthelemy, I would say that Japan NSS is confronting France with two crucial questions about the Indo-Pacific approach and its quest for reinforcing and forging new regional partnership. The first related to France's capability and ability to shape the local environment. And this is a direct question about the level of military and political engagement that France can deploy in the Indo-Pacific, compared to great power like US and China. And the second issue facing France related to the need to clarity in its regional posture. Although French diplomats boost the distinctive nature of countries' Indo-Pacific strategy vis-à-vis United States, expressions such as a third way of balancing power is not really convincing. There is a need to be promoted to see more concrete objectives. And the maritime domain is offering many avenues for innovative cooperation in maritime domain awareness or the blue economy, including the field of climate change, for example. And Japan is willing to cooperate with France, notably in the South Pacific, in this field. So I will just say that by willing to show more credibility and to increase in capability, France is very much willing to link with EU and to rely on some EU initiatives, the Global Gateway, for example, or the EU cooperation for the Indo-Pacific, which stress on security in the maritime domain, more connectivity, but also working in the field of health and, of course, climate change. And we know that Japan is a strong supporter of EU cooperation, strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. So I begin to think that at the end of the day, finally, we will find, thanks to EU, avenue for continue our rich cooperation between Japan and France. And I will stop there, Barthelemy, because I think
Thank you very much, Marianne. Don't worry, we still have over 30 minutes for exchanges for the debate. Thank you for breaking the ice on NATO. And I believe that listening to the reaction of the Japanese participants here will be very interesting, and then we can see whether or not we have a converging approaches on the expansion on NATO or the legalization of NATO in Northeast Asia. Thank you also for mentioning the fact that when it comes to the relation with China, we have to understand that on one side you have the perception of potential threats, which is of course, let's say, one of the cornerstones of all the national strategies designed by the Asian countries nowadays, including Japan, but also the reality of the economic and trade relation with that country. And therefore, we have to understand how difficult it might be for some countries, I'm thinking about Southeast Asia, for instance, to position themselves with or without or against China, which is, of course, not something that easy. As I've said, we have a little more than 30 minutes for the debates. Considering that this is a conversation, and although we had this very interesting presentations, I assume that our participants would like perhaps to ask questions to each other. So I will start maybe by giving you the floor. I mean, Marianne, you're on the screen, so perhaps if you have one or two questions to ask to Dr. Tsuruoka or Dr. Aoki, perhaps you can start, and then we will do a little round table prior to taking the questions from the audience.
Yes, with pleasure indeed. And then my question will be related to this rapprochement and this quite historic rapprochement between South Korea and Japan. And to what extent this could be a result in very concrete decision when it came to, I will say, security issue, because we may understand that North Korea could be the main driver, but also China of the need to more close cooperation, at least exchange of information in order to prevent or to try to control and do some crisis management in case of new launch from North Korea. And North Korea is showing a real appetite to develop its spatial program, and maybe Russia could offer some transfer of technology to try to help North Korea, and maybe to what extent in other other sensitive field. I don't know. I hope not. I hope that Russia had put some red line to this potential cooperation with North Korea. But in fact, we had the feeling of a more, I will say, polarized Northeast Asia with some front. I will try carefully to avoid alliance, to avoid axis, a very, very ugly word. But there is a kind of new grouping, and it seems that China and Russia is letting North Korea to stand up alongside them, to give the impression that there is a kind of coordination also among these three. And so we had a feeling and the vision of a very tense situation in Northeast Asia, just seen from Europe and from France, having in mind that, yes, there is some interrelated security between what is happening in Northeast Asia and in Europe. So, and the fact that Russia is so belligerent and aggressive in Northeast Asia is also the reflect of the aggression war that Putin launched 1 year ago in EU. So what are your views regarding this new dynamic?
Thank you, Marianne. And perhaps to add on that, is the current South Korean defense strategy going to survive Yoon Suk-yeol's presidency, which will be ending in 3.5 years from now? So it's actually pretty soon. So maybe Dr. Aoki, if you want to react to that question first.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so I think the trilateral cooperation among the United States, Japan, and South Korea, so the weakest link has always been the Japan-South Korea part, because of course Japan and South Korea are both treaty allies of the United States, but Japan and South Korea have been unable to cooperate security-wise because of their historical differences, problems stemming from Japan's 1910 to 1945 colonization of the Korean Peninsula. We have been seeing a stronger ties being forged among the three countries, as we saw in the summit, and security arrangements. I think what the countries are trying to do is to shield the relationship a little bit from the political elements that could have an impact. So what I mean by that is that the three countries are trying to institutionalize some of the cooperative measures, security cooperation measures, so that it will not be easily affected by the political winds, which could happen. Of course, I think this relates to the question about the current South Korean president, who wants to improve relations with Japan because he thinks it's in the interest of South Korea. What if somebody else takes office in 3.5 years? South Korea does have a 1-term, 5-year presidency, so there is going to be another president. We don't know who. And I will also note that from the Japanese and South Korean perspective, the U.S. presidency is also a political element that it could be it's a wild card, meaning that if a new president comes in and the new president's vision of a security policy is closer to Donald J. Trump's rather than Joe Biden's, then that is attitude toward alliances, that could introduce a different dynamic in the region. So I think part of it is trying to shield the cooperative measures a little bit from that political, element that that could have negative political winds. And I would also note that there are differences in views, threat perceptions among the three countries, particularly South Korea. South Korea is very much focused on the North Korea threat for good reason. It is concerned about China, but is more concerned about North Korea because it's on the border and it has nuclear weapons. It could attack South Korea with conventional weapons easily. So that's a justifiably a bigger threat for South Korea, whereas Japan and the United States are more worried about China. So there's a difference there as well. So that needs to be, the three countries need to align that, talk about it more, and deal with the differences. In terms of Japan and South Korea, there are many things that they can do. And for example, Japan and South Korea do not have ACSA, the Acquisition and Cross-Servicing Agreement, for example, which of course Japan and South Korea have with a lot of other countries. That is a one way, an agreement that they could try to reach, forge between the two countries. That's one way. Another way of trying to institutionalize some of the security cooperative measures between the two countries.
Thank you very much. Dr. Tsuruoka, do you have any comment you would like to add there? Or perhaps a question also for the two other panelists?
Yeah, I think a few set of reactions, and first on NATO's office in Tokyo. So this is I think this issue has been, the debate on this have been very much overheated. So out of proportion, because what we are thinking of is just a one-person office. So inherently, there aren't many things that such a small office can do. And it will never change the balance of power in the region, or it will never change the nature of NATO as a Euro-Atlantic alliance. So my message to President Macron is that no worries. So you don't need to worry about implications, because this is just a small thing. So not something that needs to have attention from the top level. So this is just the administrative innovation, the way in which NATO deals with partners in the region. So I think this issue has been very much over dramatized, and mainly by China, and also to some extent, I'm afraid that by France as well. So that's my comment, and also the Marianne mentions the more integration between Japan and the US. And that's a huge question, actually. And it's a political question. And as far as I see that, there is some progress in this regard. So more joint, so the heightened, the elevated jointness between the Japanese forces and the US forces is something that we are now seeing. But at the end of the day, it's a highly, highly political issue. So there's no appetite for Japan to have a sort of a joint command structure between the two countries. So unlike South Korea or unlike NATO, we don't have a joint command structure. So this is a really political issue. But in thinking about Japan's acquiring counter-strike capability, so for Japan to be able to utilize such new capability, we need more integration with the US, because Japan lacks targeting capability. So without targeting capability, you cannot do anything. Even if you have Tomahawk missiles on your hand, you cannot use it. So this is a structural sort of a problem. That as long as Japan thinks about using counter-strike capability, then we need to depend more on the US for operational purposes, particularly for the purpose of getting help on targeting. So that's a structural, but quite important issue.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think the message is clear. So we French shouldn't be worrying too much about a NATO office in Tokyo. To actually to that extent, I would respond that Japan shouldn't join AUKUS because from a semantic point of view, it would turn this acronym into a joke. That wouldn't be a very good signal either. I don't know if you have any other comment or question to address to the other panelists, but I do have a few questions here from the audience. So maybe we can start with the first roundtable. And there's a question about a topic that we have addressed a little bit earlier when it comes to the visit of the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier and the SSN accompanying it. It's about the fact that, well, there's absolutely no program or no debate regarding the development of nuclear weapons in Japan or by Japan. But what are the thinkings about allowing some allies to install nuclear weapons on Japanese soil? I mean, is it a taboo, not only for the political leaders, but also for the public opinion? And what are the current debates on that? So I don't know, maybe Dr. Aoki, if you want to start on that.
Sure, I can start on that. Yeah, so that would go against Japan's three non-nuclear principles that have been in place for a long time. And there's a great support for these principles. And so, as I mentioned, there was a little bit of debate in 2022 when former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe mentioned that Japan should be discussing nuclear sharing arrangements similar to that of in Europe, NATO. That was debated a little bit, but ultimately there was no appetite for that. And so allowing nuclear weapons on Japanese soil territory is still a very sensitive issue, and I don't see a lot of public backing for that. And I don't think at the political level as well, I don't see momentum, appetite for that either.
Dr. Tsuruoka, do you agree with that? I believe you do.
Yeah, I fully agree to what Dr. Aoki has just said. There's no appetite, no political willingness, no political preparedness to pursue this. But there needs to be debates on how we could maintain and strengthen the credibility of U.S. extended nuclear deterrence. So there are various ways to do that. And one of which is the deterrence dialogue, extended deterrence dialogue between Japan and the United States, which we have been doing over more than 10 years now. And South Korea actually is now trying new mechanisms. So when President Yoon visited Washington, I think it was April this year. So they issued what is called a Washington Declaration. So they established a nuclear consultative group, and also the American SSB and the strategic the nuclear submarine carrying nuclear weapons visited Busan some time ago. So the South Koreans are trying new things for the purpose of maintaining and strengthening the credibility of U.S. commitments. So there are the things that Japan also could think of. And on the specific issue of nuclear sharing, the debates in Japan are important, but at the same time, the important element here is that there's no willingness in the United States whatsoever in doing this with Japan. So this is quite clear. So my message to Japanese who like the idea of nuclear sharing is that you need to convince Americans. So you need to come up with a clear and convincing argument why sharing nuclear weapons with Japan is in America's own interest. So, but I haven't seen any such robust argument. So this is clearly I think one of the most difficult challenges for Japan if it really wants to pursue nuclear sharing. How to convince Americans?
Thank you for pointing out this particular aspect, which is very important indeed. I mean, it's not working just on one side, but also on the other. Well, Marianne, I don't know if there's a hope for France dealing with nuclear issues in Japan. What do you think? What is your opinion on that question?
With civilian nuclear issue when it came to energy, fully. Well, of course, my two colleagues speaker made a clear point of that. I think that we always need to recall that Japan is benefiting from a nuclear umbrella of US. But of course, we hope for Japan that there are discussions regarding I will say, the context of the use and to what extent, and well, some precision about the scenario in which this nuclear weapon could be utilized. And it is very interesting to see that this specific format of dialogue on extended net deterrence have been adopted by South Korea, following what Japan did for a long time with its US counterpart. This is really very interesting because it's a kind of step in strategic autonomy. You know how France loves this this term, this concept of strategic autonomy, but being in situation of discussion, the condition of the recourse to this kind of very specific weapon is of course very important within an alliance. And you know that within NATO, within EU, there is such discussion regarding a kind of use of a nuclear scenario, and a lot of, I will say, dialogue and exercise, which is another concrete step in a kind of sharing of strategic responsibility and showing respect within the framework of an alliance.
Thank you. Stay tuned, Marianne, because we have another round of questions, and actually you can be the first one answering it. It's about the perception of Japan's defense strategy in the region. I mean, we have talked about the relation with the United States. We have talked about the perception in France and in Europe in general. But how about in the region? How are the Koreans? How are the Southeast Asians? And perhaps how are the Chinese also perceiving the change of this national security strategy of Japan? So Marianne, take the floor first.
Yeah, I won't surprise you by telling you that China was very, I will say, critical regarding this new step in direction of, you see, increasing military capability, military budget, and having some access to more offensive weapon. And there were a lot of dialectic regarding Japan letting or abandoning or treason of its pacifist ideal and Pacific posture. And you know, there is very often this rhetoric regarding Japan, resurgence of Japan militarism. So no surprise when it came to China, who is taking anything just to corner the Japan and to criticize. And we saw it abundantly when Japan very transparently announced the release of the water of the Fukushima reactor. The excessive reaction went through China as we were expected. So this new defense strategy, I think, were pragmatically observed by many other, I will say, partners of Japan, which were very much willing to welcome it. Have in mind Australia reaction. Of course, you can imagine US, which was maybe pushing for quite a long time for Japan to show more, I will say, willingness to increase its defense capability. I have no specific feedback regarding, but I guess that my two fellow panelists will complete. When it came to India, for example, which is a very important partner for Japan and who is very much willing to develop its weapon arsenal in any way, including nuclear, for what it came to India. So apart from, of course, China, North Korea, and Russia, I didn't observe any negative comments or overreaction coming from, I will say, littoral state in the Indo-Pacific, but I'm listening to my colleague about that.
And don't forget that you mentioned China, but we could also be mentioning the other China, aka Taiwan, and the reaction was very different from Beijing as well.
Of course.
Dr. Aoki, perhaps if you have some insights about the reactions of the national defense strategy in other Asian countries.
Sure, of course. I think I definitely agree with the idea, the comments that, the reaction from China and North Korea, I would add, were very negative. Some mixed reaction from South Korea, of course, because there's a political level where the current administration is very much toward improving relations with Japan and trying to work with Japan, but the public portions of the public are not of that opinion. So of course there's always the skepticism toward Japan. So I would note that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Tsuruoka.
Yes, I very much agree to what has been said. And on top of that, what I would like to emphasize is that Japan is finally sort of slowly responding to other countries' military buildup. So the China, we have been seeing over the past 2 decades or so, the unilateral huge increase of Chinese military budget. And I very much believe that Japan should have woken up much earlier, but never too late. So Japan is finally and slowly responding to the deteriorating security environment surrounding the country. So this is a very reactive thing. And also if you look at the South Korea and Southeast Asian countries, they have been increasing defense budget over the past 10 years or so. And without this increase of defense budget by Japan, actually South Korean defense budget was supposed to surpass that of Japan in the coming years. But now that because Japan has decided to increase its defense budget, so I don't think South Korea's defense budget is going to surpass that of Japan. But still, the Japanese the action is very, very reactive, and that point I wanted to emphasize. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good point. So welcome to Japan, to the club of normal powers. Dr. Tsuruoka, perhaps stay tuned, because the next question is mostly for you and Dr. Aoki, and we have now about 8 minutes prior to the end of this meeting. So the question is about Japan's domestic politics, and the fact that, I mean, for us French or outsiders, sometimes it's not very clear when it comes to the change of orientations. I know that within the next few months there will be some important decisions taken by the Liberal Democratic Party about the future leadership of Japan. And we also know that lately there were some significant changes within the Kishida cabinet, with new members of the cabinet. So when it comes to these pressures from both sides, let's say, of the political chessboard in Japan, as regard the issue here, which is increasing the importance of Japan when it comes to its security strategy. How do you see the narrative, first of all, of both sides, and how do you see the potential changes in the future? So where does the public opinion stand, and where does the different leadership or sort of leadership stand also when it comes to defining it? So, Dr. Tsuruoka, perhaps you can start.
Okay.
Domestic politics
thank you very much for the question. Yes, as far as I see that, there is, I think, a more convergence of views on security and defense issues in Japan. So particularly if you compare the current situation with a situation during the Cold War, and because for a long time in Japan, the biggest opposition party was against the US-Japan alliance. So Socialist Party of Japan was against the US-Japan alliance. And they were saying that even the very existence of the self-defense forces was unconstitutional. So that sort of a divide was there for many, many years. And that sort of a division sort of disappeared and was solved after the end of the Cold War. And so the major party, or both the ruling party and opposition parties, are for the maintaining the alliance with the United States, and also they understand that they accept the existence of the self-defense forces under the current constitution. So I think more interesting and delicate and tricky debates can be found within the LDP, the ruling party, the Liberal Democratic Party. So I talked a bit about the debates on where to find money for defense, and that is quite serious. And also on the idea of amending the constitution. So the party itself, the LDP, has been arguing for changing the constitution from its inception. But there's no clear consensus on how to change. So the Article 9, the peace clause, so-called peace clause, is obviously the one of the obvious targets and of change. But how to change it, there's no consensus. And Prime Minister Abe aired an interesting idea of just adding one sentence, but there are various opposing voices for that sort of idea. So I think we need to pay. I think it's better to pay more attention to the inside, the LDP inside politics, rather than the divergences on the margins of security and defense discourse.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you, and I think actually that was the meaning of the question. That was mostly within the LDP, more than the difference among the political parties. Dr. Aoki, do you have anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll just add that, and I agree with the idea that, I mean, the LDP and the Komeito, it's a coalition party, Komeito have, I believe, about 65% of the seats in the House of Representatives, the lower house, which is the more powerful of the two houses of the parliament. So they have a big majority. There's definitely as Dr. Tsuruoka mentioned, convergence towards stronger, defense measures. It's difficult to find opponents for this. There are some opponents, but they're a minority. But where the issues, the politically sensitive issues, converge around tax increases, and that's definitely different. There are differences within the factions in the LDP, so I would agree with that as well. So it's for Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, it's not really about the opposition per se, but trying to keep the factions in place or factions behind his policies. I think that's the challenge here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Marianne, we have only 2 more minutes if you want to add something to these comments about Japan domestic politics, because sometimes from a French perspective, it's a little difficult to apprehend because we don't know exactly where are the different forces when it comes to the future agenda for Japan. And I believe that your comment would be also useful here.
Yes, I think that, we are looking at the parliamentary aspect of the political life in Japan with quite a big surprise. And what is striking for us, it's the clan and the fact that the prime minister need within the LDP also try to arrange, to manage, and to give some, I will say, some element to all of this clan by designing maybe prime minister giving some responsibility just to be sure of the loyalty of the main representative of this clan. But what I want just to mention is to congratulate Japan with the nomination of a female Minister for Foreign Affairs, because this is a very bold movement. So just to show a kind of evolution in the political military circle and the decision-making process, even if it is for the picture, which I don't think so. It's something that is perceived as a kind of modern evolution of Japan. And you know how seeing women in a higher position is a fight in many countries, including for France. So congratulations for Japan for showing this very positive example.
I think that's the best way to conclude this webinar. And of course, we're looking forward to having more insights about the future trends in Japan, not only when it comes to domestic politics, but also when it comes to how possible this new security strategy will happen to be. So I think it's time to conclude this webinar. First of all, just a quick reminder to the audience that it has been recorded and it will be available on the IRIS YouTube channel page within 2 weeks. So if you want to see these exchanges, it will be possible after 2 weeks. Dr. Aoki, thank you very much. It's still morning in Washington, D.C., so you have a long day ahead. This just the beginning of the week for you after all. So good luck for today. Good luck for that day. And thank you so much for accepting this invitation and sharing your extremely interesting comments with us. Dr. Tsuruoka, it's late in Canberra, so I believe that for you it's already nearly tomorrow. So again, thank you very much. It was also very interesting to have your comments, especially when it comes to the domestic politics in Japan. And I think that for the audience, it was extremely precious. Thank you so much again. And Marianne, thank you very much, not only for your final comments, but more generally for putting together this webinar, the subject of this webinar, because I have to remind our audience that you have been in charge of defining not only the subject, but also the maintenance of this webinar. And thank you also for reminding us the importance of France in the Indo-Pacific, and therefore we hope a good friendship and partnership between our two countries. Thank you all. Good afternoon in France, good evening, good morning in the rest of the world, and we hope to see you very soon for other activities with IRIS. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.